Ready, play.
Eala has beaten Victoria Tomova 6-3, 6-2 in the opening round in Madrid to set up a mouth-watering clash, a rematch with Iga Swiatek. I say a rematch, of course, because they played recently in Miami with Eala stunning the world number 2 in straight sets. Regarding today's win for Alex, she got off to a fine start in so many respects, winning the first 6 points with some first strike tennis, seemingly overwhelming her Bulgarian opponent. However, she did ultimately go on to lose her serve 3 times. Now, Alex's serve is something that we know can be vulnerable, even more so on clay, although she might be aided and abetted a little bit by the high altitude and a bit more pop off that otherwise underpunched, underpowered serve that she has. But in the end, she had far too much for Tomova. Tomova is, I don't think she's best suited to this surface, to be honest with you. Had a great run on the grass in Bad Homburg last year. I know she has been in the final of the W125 in Valencia also last year on the clay, but ultimately she also says that her favourite surface is the hard court. And listen, Alex had too much for her today. Now, I still maintain that Alex's best surface will always probably be the hard court. She even told me that herself last week in Portugal. Where are we at with your game and your preference? Clay, grass, hard? What's your sort of preferred condition?
Um, I prefer hard court. It's the one I grew up in, and I think my game naturally is more suited to that. But I've been, of course, I've been playing on clay for a long time as well. It's true that the clay season is shorter, much shorter than the hard season, but I love clay, and I'm just trying to get it to love me back.
Good.
When she went on that run, it was really impressive how she handled the big moments on the stadium court.
Of course, all eyes will turn to Thursday and the match, which will almost certainly be on Manola Santana, the biggest stadium in Madrid, and that upcoming clash with Iga Swiatek.
You think
Now,
about how much pressure's on Swiatek in terms of not having won a title since the French Open, not even having been in a final at all in 2025, and then obviously, her last match with Ostapenko, dealing with not only difficulty on court, but mentally dealing with that matchup. And now you've got Alex Eala coming in to Madrid with the wind under her belt and the pressure of Swiatek trying to defend all of her points, not only in Madrid but in Rome, in the French Open.
for me, this clash is as much about the mind as it is what happens on the court, particularly when it comes to Iga, having gone through that sort of barren spell and not making singles finals for almost a year. And then throw in a few losses, including one to Alex as well. So if Iga can overcome that mental hurdle, I do see things looking pretty good for the pole. Just sort of winding back to Iga, I think there's a couple of sort of bigger picture things to think about. One is she's not been in a final. Okay, there was the United Cup finals, the team event, and she did get to the last stage there. But as a singles, tournament, she hasn't been in a final since the French Open, which if you'd have said to us after she beat Paolini in that French Open final last year, she's not going to be in a final for another year, including the beginning of the clay court season, I think we'd have found that very difficult to believe. And of course, she has a new coach as well. Wim Fissette came on board at the back end of last year, and I think that was with the hope of not maintaining the clay level, but also upping the level at other tournaments and other surfaces and other conditions. And yet we are in this period right now of because again her standards are so high. For 98% of the tour, Iga season would be phenomenal. But I'm sure if I said to Iga and she gave me a frank answer, are you happy with 2025 thus far? Thus far, it would have to be no, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to be in mid-April and not to have won a tournament and not to have won a tournament, as you mentioned, after she won Roland Garros.
Mm-hmm.
To me, she, instead of feeling more settled, to me, she looks less settled on the
Yeah.
court against more opponents, gets more anxious. And I don't I don't know Iga that well, but just from the eyeball tests since being around women's tennis since '78, something feels a little not quite right for Iga right now.
Mm,
And, these are things that only the camp can figure out. And you mentioned the coaching transition. That's never easy. Somebody who in Iga who really likes the continuity hasn't had that many changes, but had a few. So yeah, I'd be a little concerned. But let's face it, if she goes on and wins another Roland Garros, we'll be having a different conversation towards in the middle of June.
Pam, when you change coaches, do you sort of, said maybe you've had you had a coach for a long time and things are going well, but there's a few bumps in the road, and that's okay because you had good times before, you trust them and blah blah blah, and the advice that they give you for tennis matches you follow. When you get a new coach, is there there's a lack of trust at the beginning? I mean, you've obviously hired them because of their CV and what they've done. And Wim Fisset's CV is pretty glittering, albeit he does tend to have short-lived spells with players. But do is there also a lack of trust in that? Because you need some good results and you need something pretty quickly. I'm just wondering if there's anything there.
Well, think about the expectations of this partnership, given Wim's success over a
Hmm.
long time with so many different players, and Iga expecting to maintain her results and her standards of the previous few years. It's a lot of pressure on a partnership, a coaching player partnership, and it's not just the player who feels the pressure; it's the team, to carry on from the previous couple of years. So I don't. I think if it wasn't working, if the chemistry wasn't right, we would already know that. I don't think that's the case. I do think it can take time. It
Mm,
can even take a full cycle of playing the tour for the year to kind of fall totally into a comfort zone.
hmm.
But we do know that continuity matters, and that having coaching player partnerships that last multiple years usually is a benefit. And we'll
Hmm.
just have to see how this plays out. But you're right. Wim's had a lot of transitions. He's had a lot of different players he's worked with. But someone like Iga is about the ultimate you can get as far
Hmm.
who does she play second round? It would be Swiatek, who has that bye.
Yeah.
So I love this in women's tennis right now, where you get like a compelling matchup, maybe a month after the first one.
As we look into this matchup with Eala, you think about what happened in Miami in terms of extremely high unforced error count for Swiatek, very uncharacteristic for her, and then also her lack of serving ability. And Eala was able to attack that second serve and get herself out on the front foot and dictate in those rallies. She played super aggressive, and that was kind of a risk reward type of tennis that she needed to play on that type of court, and it worked out well for her. But as we look into this matchup on the clay, it's a little bit different in terms of Swiatek having the ability to build rhythm in terms of point construction, but then also using her extremely high and heavy spins to her advantage. She creates so many RPMs off that forehand wing, and in Madrid, it's obviously at altitude, but it's also a high bouncing clay court. And so with her ability to, get a lot of depth, a lot of spin, and try and put these balls out of the Eala strike zone will definitely be key for her. And then kind of, using her movement and, fitness ability to her advantage in terms of, outlasting Eala in those prolonged rallies and taking her opportunities when they come.
If Iga could choose where to have that rematch, she would certainly have it on clay. Maybe she wouldn't necessarily choose Madrid, but it is what it is. It is an opening clash, of course, Iga. Her form is sketchy by her extremely high standards, not been in a final since the French Open of last year. She's also coming off another loss to Yelena Ostapenko. Of course, Ostapenko could be a potential fourth round opponent for both players, having appeared in the same section. But this is clay. It's still much more suited to Iga than it is Eala, even if, like I say, Madrid might not be Iga's necessarily her stomping ground, although she is the defending champion. Her form, though, Iga is, by her phenomenal stance. She couldn't wait for the clay season to get underway, and yet who did she find in top form in Stuttgart? Her foe, her nemesis, Jelena Ostapenko, who beat her for the 6th time in a row. However, the question, of course, is, will Alex Eala beat Iga Swiatek for a 2nd time in a row? That match still, by the way, in Miami, could easily have gone to a 3rd set. Alex there striking right at the end to get that done. I do see a slightly different match in Madrid, where I think the movement of Iga is just going to be far, far, far too much for Eala on the clay surface. And I do see Iga getting this done in straight sets.
Hey everybody, this is Zach, the host of the Triangle Tennis Podcast, making a prediction today for Eala versus Swiatek, and I'm going to get a little bit wacky with it and say the number 2 player in the world is going to win in straight sets against the number 70-something ranked player. Iga is out for revenge after their meeting in Miami and is going to get it, and while it might be a fun match, it won't be a particularly close match.
I think the first few games are going to be important for Swiatek in terms of getting out on that front foot, but overall, I think it should be a fairly straightforward win, and Swiatek advances the next round in straight sets.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things tennis.